So while Tim is setting things up, and we're very grateful to Tim for all his efforts to do all the tech stuff connected to these events, I wanted to let you know that this event is being live streamed. So if you are concerned about being seen on camera, there are 2 cameras that will be on the audience during the Q&A. So if you don't want to be seen from the camera, please move out of that angle and be conscious of what you're saying in the question and answer if you have concerns about being on the live stream. So good evening and welcome. My name is Ashley Lucas, and I'm an associate professor here in the Residential College and the Department of Theater and Drama. I also serve as the director of the Prison Creative Arts Project, or PCAP, and I'm a member of the Carceral State Project Steering Committee, along with my colleagues, Ruby Tapia, who's here in the front row, Matt Lassiter, Heather Thompson, Amanda Alexander, Nora Kronitsky, who's also here in the front. And together, we are the people who've been planning this symposium series. Tonight, we come together for the 5th panel of our series, and it seems fitting that the topic at hand is community in the carceral state. Our nation, our state, and even our campus at the University of Michigan face ongoing crises in building and sustaining cohesive and supportive communities because we have been devastated by the level of carceral control in our lives. There are a great many members of our communities who cannot be here with us tonight because they are sitting in a prison cell, or because they were prevented from attending by a probation or parole officer, or because they simply did not feel welcome on the University of Michigan campus. A few days before our last panel on control in the carceral state, the university released an announcement of a new policy called SPG 60138, Required Disclosure of Felony Charges and/or Felony Convictions. We, the members of the Carceral State Project Steering Committee, drafted an open letter to the University of Michigan, calling for the immediate repeal of this new policy, an end to the unnecessary use of background checks on students and employees, and the removal of all questions on admissions forms that have to do with an applicant's criminal history. Over 1,800 of you have joined us in signing this letter, and we are very grateful for your support. This organizing effort to change policies that support the carceral state on our campus has grown quickly and attracted the attention of local news media and politicians, regional and national activist organizations, and even the officer of Senator Brian Schatz in Hawaii, who is leading a Ban the Box campaign for college admissions nationwide. We hosted a town hall immediately after the last carceral state panel, and shortly after that meeting, a group of concerned students formed a new activist group called #UMBehindBars. Members of that group are here tonight, and they are seeking your support in their efforts to forward the goals that we laid out in our open letter. The UM Behind Bars group has begun by bringing together students on our campus, but they want a community coalition. They're seeking participation from students, faculty, staff, and alumni from all 3 University of Michigan campuses, as well as members of surrounding communities and activist groups across the state. The first major place where the UM Behind Bars campaign could use your help is in attending the next Regents meeting, which is on Thursday, March 28th at 4 p.m. at the clubhouse at the golf course right across the street from the Big House Stadium. So if you're able to attend, we hope that you can join us. Several members of the UM Behind Bars campaign and members of the Carceral State Project Planning Committee will be speaking there about these policies. A number of concerned staff approached me and other members of our steering committee after our town hall last month to say that they really wanted to sign our open letter to the university, but they didn't feel comfortable doing so because they thought their jobs might be at risk. I find this deeply disturbing. If you are a university employee who wishes to share your story anonymously, you can do so by emailing the UM Behind Bars organizers at behindbars@umich.edu. Students in this group are setting up recording sessions where people can tell their stories anonymously and even have their voices obscured technologically to protect their identities. You can also send written accounts of your concerns to behindbars@umich.edu, and the organizers in the group will use material from these stories in their remarks to the Regents on March 28th. There are flyers on those tables in the back of the room tonight for those who would like more information about UM Behind Bars and their efforts. The members of the Carceral State Project Steering Committee very much support the work of UM Behind Bars, but we are not its leaders. Student activist leadership on our campus brought that group into existence and is carrying it forward. And in doing so, they continue both the legacy of advocacy for prison education on our campus that dates back at least as far as the 1930s, as well as the much longer and more storied history of student activism about social justice at the university writ large. We are also seeing wonderful work being done by the Carceral State Rackham Interdisciplinary Workshop, founded by graduate students Elizabeth Tackey, Grace Zanotti, and Rachel Cockwell. Some people have been giving our faculty group credit for the things that these graduate students have been doing, and we want to fully acknowledge, admire, and support their work, but not take credit for it. For both of these student groups, we serve as willing participants and give advice and support as the students request our help. Likewise, we've seen organizers from LEO and GEO unions and community members from beyond our campus taking leadership in these advocacy efforts. Patrick Bates, a PCAP facilitator and advocate for formerly incarcerated people, spoke at a February meeting of the Central Student Government here on our campus to encourage them to sign on to the Carceral States Project's open letter and oppose the university's carceral policies. Natalie Holbrook, program director at the American Friends Service Committee, who's on tonight's panel, appeared on WDET radio with my colleague Heather Thompson, Detroit City Councilwoman Janae Ayers, and Asa Johnson from the Detroit Bail Project to discuss our university's felony disclosure policy and the City of Detroit's recent vote to ban the box from all applications for rental housing. Natalie also wrote a particularly thoughtful and well-argued letter to President Schlissel and to the regents to share her concerns about the felony disclosure policy and the use of background checks on our campus. We are deeply grateful for that leadership from these and other community members. We, that is the Carceral State Project that hosts these monthly panels, are still very much in the planning stages of what we hope to do as a group. And our work unexpectedly catapulted forward with greater urgency when the university announced the new felony disclosure policy. We didn't know it was coming, and we tried to respond as best we could. We began with a 5x5 grant from the Michigan Humanities Collaboratory. These small seed grants bring together 5 university professors for 5 meetings to work on a shared research project across one school year. We used our grant to plan the Symposium series as a way of inviting many different constituencies into our future plans for a proposed center for the study of the carceral state. That's why our panels have not included researchers or other academics. We wanted to focus on the people most affected by these issues, who live and work in close proximity to the perils of the carceral state. Thanks to all of our panelists, to those of you here, and the folks who have come to our previous panels, we've seen the breadth and enthusiasm of the many communities who have a stake in these issues and who want to actively participate in whatever plans we make as we move forward. We very much want to partner with you, and we also want to make clear our intentions. We are a collective of activist scholars who have the ability and desire to seek out university and foundation support for research projects that will enable us to collaboratively partner deeply and meaningfully with the people most affected by the forces of societal control that we're calling the carceral state. We specialize in storytelling, history, the arts, and humanities, and we have plans to amass a giant archive of oral histories, artwork, correspondence, and other narratives to document what carceral control has done to our nation and its people. We are living in a moment of extraordinary crisis, with the highest incarceration rates in world history. A time that I believe we will look back on with the sorrow and shame with which we now view slavery. The work of the Carceral State Project is fundamentally to record the stories of, work alongside, and advocate for the people who endure this crisis, particularly those who are currently and formerly incarcerated and their families. We hope to engage with activists, community groups, formerly incarcerated people, currently incarcerated people, and their families, as well as with communities on our campus, faculty, students, postdocs, and staff across the 3 University of Michigan campuses and beyond. Much of this kind of engagement is already happening on our campus, and we are hoping that the proposed Center for the Study of the Carceral State would bring resources and networks of support both to folks doing this kind of work on our campus and those off campus doing related things. We are hoping to do this in a way that would give meaningful recognition, resources, and support to our community partners in ways that we have not been able to do in the past. One current example of this in our work at PCAP at present has to do with a collaboration among a group of professional architects, graduate students, and currently and formerly incarcerated people. Jeffrey Mansfield and Michael Murphy, professors of the Mass Design Group, members of the Mass Design Group, the firm that recently designed the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, are on our campus for this semester only as visiting professors in the Taubman School of Architecture. They're teaching a studio class to 12 doctoral students who are investigating whether it's possible, and they haven't decided about this yet, to use design to transform prisons into spaces that encourage learning, public safety, personal growth, and reentry. To this end, they've held interactive design workshops with people currently and formerly in prison from the PCAP population. And this morning, they were at the Federal Correctional Institute at Milan to talk to the men there. The students and experts on prison, on prison life have had a significant impact on one another in this process. The formerly incarcerated participants are being paid for their time and labor, and the students are earning course credit. Any publications that come out of these collaborations will be co-authored by students and community members together. This kind of mutually beneficial working model is what we hope to implement in all of our work through the Carceral State Project. That said, we do not yet have a center, an advisory board, or sustained funding. The Humanities Collaboratory has recently awarded us another grant to do more planning over the summer for what we hope will be a bigger move to a more sustainable and more sustainable infrastructure and programming in the 2019-2020 school year. Many of you have told us that you want to be involved, and we hear you. We just need a little more time to finish this school year, regroup, and figure out how to move forward. But we have every intention of involving more people, particularly those who have served time in prison and their family and people who are currently in prison, in our planning process in the months to come. Thank you for your support and for your patience. Before we meet our distinguished panelists for this evening, I want to announce that one of our former panelists, Asia Johnson, whom many of you heard speak on the Containment and the Carceral State panel in January, has been awarded a prestigious Right of Return USA Fellowship for formerly incarcerated artists. Asia is one of only 6 people chosen across the country, and she will receive a $20,000 stipend to support her artistic goals. So please join me in congratulating Asia. And now we turn to the task at hand, to a conversation about how the carceral state shapes communities and how communities, both inside and outside the walls, shape the carceral state. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and ask that they please each introduce themselves so that we can hear in their own words what work they're doing and why it's important to them.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Can you hear me? Excellent. My name is Aaron Suganuma. I am the executive director of A Brighter Way, mentoring. Can you hear me?
No.
Can't hear me. There we go. There we go. We've got some reverb. All right. So my name is Aaron Suganuma. I'm the executive director of A Brighter Way. We are a mentoring and social support program for men and women returning to Washtenaw County from especially prison, but also jail. I am also a prison-based substance abuse counselor and a steering team member for Nation Outside. Nation Outside being a group formed to elevate the voice of formerly incarcerated people at criminal justice reform and policy discussions. We foremost want to let people know that people with felonies have the right to vote and that voices can't be muted. And so therefore we want to encourage people, not just formerly incarcerated people, but families, community members, just everybody to get involved. I'm also a executive board member of the Youth Justice Fund, an organization that was started to support people who are incarcerated as juveniles in the adult system and provide a community of resources for them after they are released. I am a social worker with a specialty in mental health and chemical dependency. And I'm a formerly incarcerated person. I spent 4.5 years in prison. I got out in 2009. I love dogs. No, you know, one of the other things.
Why'd you look at me?
One of the other things too. One of the things that really brings me here though is the thing is, and I don't want to take too much time. When I was incarcerated, I was scared. But one of the things that I was scared starting off, walking through the gates at Jackson and looking at these gigantic buildings and all these people I didn't know, and one of the things that I found is that a lot of the people there were just as scared as I was, and we showed it in different ways. But one of the things that I saw time after time is people with compelling stories, deep intelligence, and compassion. And I saw person after person who had been failed by the system. And so I said, if I have any chance to be able to do something about it, I desperately want to take that. Because there's a lot of people still there who don't need to be, and a lot of people who will go there who don't need to be. So I'm grateful to be here. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. Excuse me. My name is Dr. Melanie McPherson. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan in several areas, MSW, MS, and PhD. I'm here tonight to talk about the relationship that I've had with children who were placed in the system because their mother and father were either in prison or using substances, and they didn't have any place else to go. So in 1992, when my children appeared, the children that I adopted appeared in my life, I had been accepted into 6 schools of linguistics, full rides. But I had to change all of my plans in order to take the children because their mother and father could not take care of them. And because of that, I think I suffered depression and just not wanting to deal with reality, but I knew I had to take the children. There was no room for anyone else to be in their life. So if there are any questions about how I feel about this, how I feel about giving up my life that I thought I was going to have, I am the person you should talk with. I do not regret that I took the children. There was nowhere else for them to go. What I do regret is that we don't have a system to take care of children who have been affected by alcohol and drugs, other than locking the parents up and putting the children in some kind of program. I took them because my name is McPherson, their name is McPherson. I took them because it would have been a shame to see the last McPhersons, the last of my name, put away. Currently, one of the children, the boys are twins, and my daughter is 26, the boys are 27. One of the boys is in a facility for the mentally ill, and the other one is currently in Washington County Jail. It's been a long, hard struggle dealing with children with a background of parents who couldn't take care of them, and children who have mental illness that isn't discovered until later. They were born with FASD. Later, they discovered that, after testing, they discovered that they had schizophrenia. So their mother and their father both had schizophrenia. But I didn't let that deter me from wanting to take care of them, because everybody needs a break. I needed a break. So, any questions about adopting kids that you love, but you want to love your private life even more? Ask me all the questions you want.
Hi, I'm Heather Martin. I'm the founder and director of Youth Arts Alliance. Youth Arts Alliance is a collaborative arts organization that prioritizes youth both in and at risk of becoming involved in the justice system. We work in 4 counties, Washtenaw County, Jackson County, Monroe County, and Wayne County. There we go, got there. To speak a little bit about the work that we do, we're really focused on healing-centered and collaborative arts practice that brings local artists with their passions, their skill sets, into settings where there currently aren't arts opportunities, and also in sort of the big gaping holes in our communities where there are no longer arts opportunities. And art, I believe, is a vehicle, a tool, a healing, a projecting, a visioning for a future. So art in that capacity is really what is tapping into young people's already present incredible capacity to be creative and have visions for the communities that they want to be a part of. And so I'm sitting here as the founder and director, but we have a large cohort of incredible young people who are involved in our project, and also local artists who make that work happen. We're currently serving 130 youth a week with really amazing artistic experiences, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm Kathy Gorley. I think what's most relevant is that I'm the mother of someone that served 11 years in prison and is now on parole. But there's a little more interest to my background. I was always interested in the underdog, and about 1990, when we moved to Michigan, I noticed that there was a prison near where we lived, and when my youngest of 3 children started preschool, I went over to the prison and said, I'd like to volunteer to do something here. I have a major in math, maybe I could tutor math. And they said, okay, great, come on in. And well, they told me come back on Tuesday, but I didn't really get any training. So I went on the appointed day, and I was terrified. I had seen all these movies about what prisons were like and stuff. But I went in, and by the time I left, a couple hours later, I was just so overjoyed because I realized that they were just people. I mean, just normal, friendly people inside. And if this was the worst that society had to offer, then society was a lot better than I thought it was. That was how I felt. So, yeah, there was just normal people. And I think Aaron alluded to all the good people that are behind bars, but they're very hidden, and so we don't know about them. And so we have all these stereotypes. There was obvious racial disparity, I must admit that, but I mean, they were very nice, kind people. That was 1990, and after I volunteered in the prison, I then started volunteering for the AFSC, and I volunteered for a Kids Needs Mom program where I drove children to visit their mothers in Coldwater, never knowing that I would be personally affected, that our family would be personally affected until about 15 years later. And I guess that shows 2 things. One, that there really is mass incarceration, that anybody could be affected, that it's very widespread, that our society is just full of people that have been incarcerated, that are incarcerated, that are related to people. And the other thing it could show is that I was prepared. You know, this was my path in life. When our son got arrested, that I knew what was going to happen, and I just decided this must be what I'm supposed to do, and devoted more of my volunteer energy to working on the problem. So after the 11 years, and I'll be talking about what it's like to go into the prisons and visit someone, now he's on parole, and I'm still volunteering. I'm still volunteering with AFSC after a lot of years. And I've gotten involved with the Friends of Restorative Justice of Washtenaw County, which I think is a good alternative to prison, and Citizens for Prison Reform, which is family of people incarcerated. And I helped start a group called Citizens for Justice, which is to help people on the sex offender registry and their family and friends. It's support and advocacy for that group.
Hi, can you hear me? Should I put this on my lap?
You can take the mic off the stand if that's helpful.
Is that good? Hi, I'm Natalie Holbrook. I'm the program director of the American Friends Service Committee's Michigan Criminal Justice Program. We are a Quaker organization that has an international presence, but in Michigan we've been working around the problem of prison in the state of Michigan since 1969. I've been with the AFSC since 2003, so I'm in my 16th year. We provide advocacy services to people who are incarcerated currently in the state of Michigan around all sorts of conditions of confinement issues. And major things that we work on are parole, access to parole, preparation for parole, conditions of confinement like abuse and neglect, problems with mental health care services in prison, overcrowding issues, and stuff that the problem of prison brings up for folks over and over and over again. So we do direct service work with people, but then we build relationships with folks through this work. and we never take stories or situations without giving back. We believe very much that we can help people navigate the system and that we can be there as supports and allies and friends. And so we are there for folks, and then we work on systemic change based on what people bring to our attention. Our long-term goal is to abolish prisons completely. I know that's a little ways off in the distance, but we see prisons as being directly connected to the legacy of slavery and genocide in this country, and that we have to do something different than what we're doing to deal with harms in communities, because it just creates cyclical violence. I can say that what has happened in my personal life from being connected to people in prison is that most of the people I love most in the world have done time in prison. Some of them are out now and are my dear, dear friends and are there for me, and I'm there for them. And some of them are still inside. And I feel like, I don't use the word blessed, but fortunate beyond belief to have come into this work and for it to be my life's work, and for my little girl to be being raised up with people who have done great harm in community and who now are doing great good in community. So that's me.
Thank you all so much. And just to mix things up, I'm going to ask that when we start answering the questions, we're going to start with Natalie and come back down this way, because I like to shake it up a little sometimes. So the first question that I wanted the panel to address has to do with the fact that prisons are often described as places that are totally self-contained. And a lot of the public conversations we have about prisons ignore the ways in which carceral control bleeds out of the physical building of the prison and leaks into the rest of our lives, or perhaps came from the rest of our lives and gets more concentrated inside the building of the prison. So I want to ask the panel, what impact has the carceral state had on your life outside of prison and or the lives of others who are not currently in prison or youth detention? And it seems fitting to start with Natalie, who just mentioned her precious daughter.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashley. So yes, prison has really impacted my kid's life. But the thing that's really beautiful about that is I get to talk to my daughter about, and her friends and my stepkids about the problem of prison is something that we can aspire to something different, right? And so that we've been talking about prison for years. She's known what it is, which was a conflict when I first realized that she could understand and think. And that I'm like bringing up this thing that we do to people, which is completely inhumane and not age appropriate, except children go into prisons all of the time. They go visit their parents. Babies have their diapers taken off through the bubble and a state diaper put on. And they are subjected to prison all of the time, right? So my kid can be subjected to the problem of prison also, because she's the one that can help foster change, and just like the kids that are going through the bubble. So I think it's really important for us to realize that prison does permeate every facet of the landscape of the state of Michigan. There are 29 prisons here. If you go into the Upper Peninsula, there are signs on all of the freeways about where the prisons are. And there were 7 prisons, there are now 6 up there. And the people of Marinesco threw down when they closed Ojibwe, which was on the border of Wisconsin, because they had come to rely on that prison so much in their community for jobs and also as a way of life. And I think that we don't realize how much prisons become parts of whole communities, where everybody knows somebody who works at the prison. When Pete, who is now a PhD student here at U of M, started working at AFSC in 2010, I met him when he was in solitary confinement in the Michigan Department of Corrections. We were doing some work on segregation, and he came to work with us after he got out of prison, which was amazing, and one of the things that lit a fire under my ass to keep doing this work. But when we would go to Ionia to do parole workshops, because we go back into the prisons and we talk to people about how to prepare for parole, we would go to this place called Oliveros. I think that's what it's called. It's like one of the only places you can eat on Ionia. And it'd be like full up of COs and case managers, and Pete's like, "Hey, Lieutenant, what's up?" Like, that they're just everywhere, like it is a prison town. And so there's this like actual practical overflowing into communities, like it's there, it's people, they're there, they're living in our communities. And then there's also, what does it do to us as people out here that are not connected directly? Some of us are not. I mean, I'm super connected to prisons now, but I wasn't always. And so they permeate every facet of life. And they also permeate, think about this, I've done some research on food history and food, how the DOC has actually bought food throughout the years, right? From farmers, from local providers, from people who like have ground chuck that's like really mass produced, but they get it, it's a local business in Michigan and they buy it from that business. And those businesses feel like when it goes private that they're losing out. And then for years, up until 2001, there was a cannery at Jackson that they canned all kinds of food there and then sold it to the public. And even the history before that, when you look at Jackson Prison, when it was first, like in, I think, right at the beginning, they had like hog farms and they sold all kinds of extra hog parts, the bad hog parts, to the public. So we have had a relationship in community with prisons for years and years and years, and it goes unrecognized, and it's just gotten bigger and bigger, and it is totally part of the landscape. I do want to point out, the UP has those 7 prisons, 6 prisons now, because the copper industry and the forest industry went away. And when those prisons were built, except for Marquette, the people of the UP did not want those prisons there. They screamed and yelled about it. And now they don't want them shut. So it's something that we have to do in public discourse and in our personal conversations is really talk about this and what instead can people do than rely on prisons for jobs and for community.
So I guess I'll talk about how families are affected by having people in prison. A lot of you might already be familiar with some of this, but as a mother, when my son was first arrested and then went into prison, and it's probably most mothers are, if your child is hurt, you're hurting. So I mean, I kind of went to prison with him. I'd lie in bed at night and imagine what he was doing, and have nightmares of being in prison and stuff like that, and and then after a while I realized I can't do this. I mean, and it's not doing him any good, and it's not doing me any good. So he'd call, and my husband would say all the things we were doing that was fun and interesting, and I'd say, "Oh no, he'll feel bad," and he says, "No, he wants to hear about it. Nothing's going on in his life. He wants to have some good things to imagine." So anyway, I stopped living as a prisoner myself, but I think all families, especially parents, are somewhat affected by that. When my son was being sentenced, we wrote a lot of letters in support of him, the family members, and told how much he was going to be missed and how he helped his grandma and cut her grass and how she could use his help and he would be going away and all the ways he'd be missed. And the judge, Judge Archie Brown, I guess he was somewhat moved by the letters, and he said, "Well, this is really nice, but that's not my job. I'm not supposed to consider how the community is going to be hurt, how the family is going to be hurt. My job is just to deal with this one person and decide what the appropriate sentence is." So the family is ignored. And once you're in prison, they don't care about the family either. The only time they'll tell you anything is if your loved one is almost dead. Otherwise, there's someone in our support group that went to prison last week to go visit their son, and they got there and he wasn't there. He had gone into medical quarantine, and they didn't know that. They drove, to visit, and then they wouldn't tell him anything more. They wouldn't tell him why he went to medical quarantine or when he would get out or anything. They just, part of that's HIPAA, but they could have, as their son went to medical quarantine, they could say, here's a disclosure form. Please write down here who you want us to inform. We won't even call them, but if they ask, give us permission to tell them, but they don't do that. So eventually he got out and he's fine. But I know we went to visit our son in the Upper Peninsula. He spent 2.5 years in the Upper Peninsula with one of these 7 prisons, and a lot of expense driving up there, a lot of time to visit him. And we visited him on the way up. We planned a vacation. We did a lot of vacationing around Michigan visiting my son. And on the way back, which was the next weekend, we stopped to visit him, and it turned out that he was in segregation. Somebody had attacked him, and they said, well, you can't visit because it's not visiting time for segregation. That's Thursday morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. So you never know. And they get transferred without any notice, too. The family is not even an afterthought. It's not considered. So families spend a lot of money. They don't try to put them close to home, as far as I know. Maybe at the end, because at the end, when they were about ready to get out, our son was in Jackson. But he, 2.5 years in the Upper Peninsula, Manistee, Muskegon, got to know the state pretty well. We spend a lot of money on phone calls, on money for a prisoner account. The prisoners get about, if they have a job, which there's not enough jobs, and they're mostly not full-time, they get about 20 or 30 cents an hour, but they have to pay full cost for any items in the store, and they have to buy a lot of things. I mean, hygiene items. There's also medical copays. If you ask to see a doctor, then it's a $5 medical copay on your 20 to 30 cents an hour. That's not full-time, if you have a job. The mail restrictions have gotten really tight. Kids can't draw pictures in color to their parents anymore, only black and white ink on white paper. As well as a prison, there's about equal number of people in jails in Michigan, and Washtenaw County Jail has eliminated visits altogether. They have telephone visits, but I just call that a video phone call. And you have to go to the jail lobby to do the video phone visit, and then your loved one is in the same building, a few rooms away, and you talk on this little screen, and it's recorded. The phone call is recorded. So I can't imagine what little kids think seeing their parent on this little screen in the jail. It's just inhumane.
So in terms of juvenile justice, much like the greater carceral state adult systems, it's harmful. It's deeply harmful. And one thing that I want to say to the group at large is that I'm going to use the word children, and I'm not going to say juvenile, and I'm not even going to say youth. I'm going to say child, children. The familial connections that are severed or harmed while youth are incarcerated either in the adult system or in the juvenile system, it's significant, because if you're not at home, you're not at home, right? You're not at dinner. You're not going to school. You're not seeing the teacher who's checking in on you. You are removed from your community, and ultimately, it's truly harmful. And I could feed you some statistics that maybe would alarm you or maybe wouldn't. Youth of color who are involved in the juvenile justice system, specifically black young men in this state, have a 16% rate of graduation. 16%. Youth who are involved in the drug court process across the country and have had multiple involvements in the juvenile justice system are 85% likely to either end up in prison or dead by the age of 25. In Washtenaw County specifically, we are incarcerating the majority of youth who are incarcerated at the local youth center right down the road, because also part of our practice in Youth Arts Alliance is to remove these physical barriers of where kids are being held, to introduce community into collaborative art practice. But over half of the population at the local youth center are coming from 48198 and 48197 zip codes, which is not representative of the county at large. 6 youth of color are incarcerated to 1 white youth in Washtenaw County, right here in our liberal haven, in our progressive place of like great ideas and big ideas for the future. So in thinking about how the juvenile justice, and that's the work and the spaces that I occupy, in thinking about the young people, I would ask us to question what we want for young people, what we want for children, right? Because they're young. So I want their bodies to move freely. I want them to experience the senses of clay and paint and the creative opportunity in writing and mosaic and mural art. And so in talking about the greater consequence for community, it's like these are young people whose minds are being fostered for their entire future. There are developmental milestones, synaptic connections that happen at these pivotal developmental ages that are lost, that there's a great difficulty in repairing them, right? Connections and relationships. Okay, so I'll tell a few stories, just really quickly, with the permission of the young artists that we work with. So what Youth Arts Alliance is trying to do as an organization is to bring families in creative collaboration with the young people who are incarcerated, to find space to create. And what that might look like is at a recent family event we hosted in Ypsilanti. I'll call him Gordon. Also, we could have another discussion about the anonymity and the confidentiality of the justice system, also as potentially harmful and weaponizing and stripping of identity and who I am and where I exist and the stories I have to tell and the art I want to make. But we don't want to exploit young people, except that we are, and then taking bureaucratic language, visiting hours from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., and how you talk about everyone and the process you go through. Okay, are you with me? Yeah. I'm sorry, I need affirmation, so just a head nod or something. You're a big crowd up there. So Gordon, which is not his real name, and I wish I could say it to you from the top of this roof to tell you how incredible he is as a young person, came into this public space where all of the youth were released from the facility for our event. I have to tell you that we're a collaborative organization, that every site where we provide programming, despite being a carceral space, are investing in arts experiences for young people. And so are foundations and donors, and it's a public-private partnership to make this thing go. And so with incredible permission, young people are released as part of our programming. And you better believe I'm trying to get them out every chance I can. So Gordon walks into this public space in Ypsilanti for an event, and his family is there. And his sister runs up to him with great speed, giving him a hug with tears running down her face. And she said, "I miss you so much, Gordon." And she was 6. And so if you're spending on average 3, 6, 9, a year or more in settings that control how you behave, right? Control how you visit, control how you see the person you love. She said, "I stopped at the weaving booth. I have no idea what's going on. Will you come help me?" And I watched Gordon take his sister's hand and walk over to the weaving station. And I watched him patiently and slowly guide her through the task. Or perhaps I'll tell you about Darian, who performed his music in the local youth center with parents and siblings invited. We provide dinner, we make it a real event. Because one of the also reverberating consequences of the carceral state is the stories we tell of the people who reside there. What are the updates? What do you tell your neighbor? What do you tell your coworker? How do you talk about the person you love? How do you tell stories in a context that doesn't further alienate or isolate those people, right? And part of that is saying, you wouldn't believe what Darian performed the other day. He's an exceptional musician. He created his own original lyrics. He created his own beats. He polished up using advanced audio engineering techniques this song, and then he performed it for a group of 50 people. And those people are probation officers, those people are grandparents. And do not tell me that young people are isolated from the generations of their family, because they're not, they're there. Because in that same moment, youth are reciting poetry for their sister, their mother, their mother's sister, their grandmother, and their great-grandmother. And upon invitation, they come. And so Darian finishes his really awesome song. And his young sister, about 3 feet high, the same age as my son, 3 years old, we opened the floor for questions, and she asked for the mic. And she said, "Will you sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" And Darian's like, "Oh, man. Like, you're really just kind of ruining this for me. I got a vibe." And he looked at her, and a tear rolled down his face. And he started singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And would you believe, 50 people, direct service workers, probation officers, corrections, you know what I mean? 50 people sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to this young girl. And I think, for me, the deep irony in that is that every single one of those kids deserves 50 people singing a song at their request, or 50 people responding to their passion and desire for their place in the world and what they want to do with it. Did you flash it at me? Yeah, wait, like probably like before Twinkle, Twinkle. Okay. Okay.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I can't match it. I don't want to talk now. So the boys that I was raising that were mentally ill were always in trouble from the time they were like 12 years old. Stealing, breaking into cars, breaking into people's houses. And they were, at the time, they were also receiving help from CSTS here in Ann Arbor. But the problem was they were dually diagnosed. Not only were they mentally ill, they were substance abusing. And they had been born with fetal alcohol syndrome. So coming up through the system, it was really hard to get everybody on board about their diagnosis and what should be done for them. So at one point, one of the officials here, where they were being taken care of, said, "Well, you don't have to get a job, you don't have to go to school, because you're mentally ill and you're gonna always have money." And from that point, I think my sons at the time were like maybe 17 or 18. From that point, they refused to do anything other than doing something illegal, because this woman told him that he was always gonna have money, so he didn't have to go to school, he didn't have to do anything. So I was very upset about it. I went over and talked to the officials, which I might add, every like 3 or 4 weeks, the social workers flipped over. So I would talk to somebody on January 1st, on February 1st, that person was gone. So the system is really screwed up. The system that's supposed to be helping young people, especially, get a grip on their life and move forward, it doesn't work, because the system doesn't work. So I've been very upset about that for a very long time, but it doesn't matter now, because one of the twin boys is in a facility for the mentally ill. And my other son is in the Washington County Jail because there's nobody, because they're dually diagnosed. There's no one who wants to take on the challenge of dealing with children like that. We'll just bring them into the system, give them a little bit of money, and maybe they'll go away. So that's been a very, very frustrating experience dealing with. Actually, now that I think about it, at least it's Washington County, because if we were in Wayne County, it would be really bad. You know, Washington is considerate, and they try to do I think they try to do a good job with people who are mentally ill. If we were in Wayne County, it would be terrible. They would have been dead by now. I think that's the thing, since I've been raising the children, has been the thing that has bothered me most, that I couldn't get help for the problems that they had. And I guess there's no one to blame, actually, because the system is set up a certain way. Like every month they had a new clinical, they had a new social worker, and there was nothing I could do about that except be disturbed and complain and jump up and down, and that didn't work. It was like, where do you think you are? You're not in charge of anything. And since I graduated from the University of Michigan, I thought I was in charge of everything, you know? But anyway, I'm glad I had an opportunity to talk with you people today, because I think it's important to realize that young people who suffer from mental illness and who also have substance abuse problems need to be helped immediately. I mean, it just can't be put off. You can't say, well, you're going to go to jail and it'll fix you. You'll be fixed there. I'm just very upset about the way that my children ended up. I did the best that I could. Well, God knows. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. Sure. It's hard to follow. It's hard to follow any of these. I mean, there's so many compelling stories here. I mean, it's really, you know, got my mind just wandering, just thinking about all the stories, all the lives that are being lived right now in the different places where people are at, you know, and you know, from hearing about how many people, I mean, the largest service provider, right, of mental health and substance abuse services is the carceral state, right? So the first place that a lot of people end up getting contact with, here's what a social worker could be, here's what counseling could be. It's go there or get locked up, you know, comply. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not positively reinforced, you know, and like you mentioned, so many of the people in those positions, there's a high amount of turnover. And so how can I actually build rapport? How can I actually build trust with somebody if the people in the systems that I'm accessing, even if I do choose to engage with them and to trust them and invest in them, they're going to be gone in a month. Mm-hmm. You know, it's one of the things that I have experienced personally myself, and one of the things that I try to bring into the practice is I've been a substance abuse counselor. You know, that being said, you know, the impact of the carceral state on our community, you know, for those who are not incarcerated, you can look at it from those first contacts, but then it can also, you know, you can also say it starts very young. You know, you hear about all these stories on the news, you know, and about, you know, X person who looks a certain way, who has a certain kind of name, committed X crime, and you know, I mean, I think that we all know about racial profiling. You know, we've got enculturation such as, you know, metal detectors, police in schools, all these kinds of things that start to prime people, start to give people this idea of who I am, who I can be, and who I am in relationship to the community. And I think that one of the things that happens is, for some folks is, I know that this was the case for me, is that, well, you know, it would seem that I don't fit into your conception of who I'm supposed to be, or you know, this archetype for a productive citizen. You know, if I can't do that well, at least I can do this other thing well. And one of the things, I was actually, so I was in I was at the boot camp at Cassidy Lake today, and I'm doing a group, and we're doing this exercise. It's called a rational self-assessment, where people are supposed to learn how to challenge their irrational beliefs. And this guy, he came out of nowhere and he shared, we actually weren't talking about that right there, but he said, one of my irrational self-beliefs that I keep thinking over and over again is, I'm an addict, I'm an ex-convict, I'm a felon, and there's going to be no opportunity for me after this. I might as well just give up right now. And, I gave him a lot of praise for that, because he recognized if you play that tape forward, if these are the labels that you're putting on yourself, you're not going to, if you play that forward, it's not going to take you anywhere. We need to be able to create hope, to foster that hope, to be able to create opportunities for people. Because me personally, I know that when I came out, I was convinced it was basically that internalized stigma was very real. There's the fear of the, banning the box and all that kind of stuff. If I see that box in that application, of course I don't want to, after I do get out, after I give myself the chance to be able to get back involved with the system and all these things, I see that box and I know that's it. That's going to be a barrier, They're probably going to throw my application away. I remember just walking down the street, sitting in a restaurant, and just feeling like it just said felon right across my forehead. I went into a restaurant. The first restaurant that I went into, they set I had metal utensils. The waitress starts walking up to me. I grab my knife and I put it. I'm like, I'm not going to be seen with any of these metal utensils around me. Are you kidding me? And then I look up and she's like looking at. Honestly, like, I don't know what she thought. I know what I thought. But, the stigma is real, and that's one of the things that I end up, I'm so encouraged and inspired by hearing the work that that you're doing, the work that so many of us are doing to be able to shed light on the system. Because at the end of the day, these large structures are not going to change. Politicians aren't going to change unless they know that it's going to be safe for them. And I know that that's going to be another question coming up, so I'll expand on that later. But I will also say that one of barriers, some of the big barriers that I've faced personally as a returning person, for instance, today, I'm a homeowner. I own a home in Ann Arbor, very lucky.
Nice house, too.
Thank you. Had some folks over for Thanksgiving. It was good. Costco did good. But I can never rent from McKinley. Before we moved there, we were looking for an apartment, and I went on this search looking for a place to rent. And one of the things that I found is that I'd get these applications. They'd be asking for an application fee, and I'd let them know. I said, hey, right up front, hey, this is what I got on my record. And they'd be like, well, you might as well come in and just fill out the application. By the way, that'll be $100. Anyway, longer story short, I ended up learning that I'm actually classified, because I've got a Class A felony. McKinley will never rent to me for life. And most renters in this area, because McKinley is the largest broker, go by McKinley standards. So it's just tough. I ended up not going to school here and not going to school at Wayne State University, even though I was accepted, because of the admissions process. I felt like I was discriminated against, felt like I was called out, and I just didn't want to rehash that. So that's why I'm active and engaged in this. So.
Thank you all so much. One of the recurring themes in the stuff that you've been saying is how disorienting it is to be in the in-between space of knowing that you are a part of a community that lives on both sides of the prison walls, that whether you've done time yourself or you're connected to other people who are, that your space in that community is neither here nor there, because the people that we care about are cut off from us, whichever side of the walls you're on. So I wanted to ask you how the people in your family, neighborhood, or community have navigated, maintained, or lost critical relationships that have been divided by the carceral state. Aaron, do you want to?
We're on a roll here. I got lucky. My mom was engaged and engaged in my life. At least she tried to be, you know. And funny thing, as a result of the carceral state, she knew where to find me. But that being said, you know, I'm very lucky. You know, I've got a mom who wanted to be engaged with me, and she had means. And so when I was in Iron River, one of the satellites of Marinesco, she had the means and the ability and the flexibility. You can't understand. There's no way that I can state how privileged I was in this respect, and many other respects. To visit me, she would drive her car to DTW. She would get on an airplane and she would fly to Green Bay. At Green Bay, she would rent a car and she would drive to Iron River to come visit me. And that was, I mean, honestly, I think that it saved her time. She's an older, she doesn't like driving alone. She doesn't like driving at night. How many people are able to do that, you know? And so that's one of the things that, that for me was huge. You know, if I said that one of the things that really inspired me to do this work was I saw that the system was failing so many people, you know, I recognize my privilege in some ways, in a lot of ways. I try to be reflective of that, but I also want to create, one of the reasons why I work with some friends to be able to start a brighter way and do the work that I do is I don't want my experience to be unique, you know. I think that, you know, so many people, they get out, they want to do something different, but they're coming back to the same areas, the same communities, same people, you know, the same situations that ran themselves into issues in the first place. And so how can we do what we can to be able to grow that support network? That being said, you know, one of the things, even though my mom was lucky, even though she did get to connect with me, one of the things that she also said was that, you know, I don't think that she told her family or any of her friends that I was incarcerated till I was gone for almost a year. She was terribly embarrassed, terribly shamed, and you know, and she realized, you know, that family was going to start asking, well, why isn't Aaron around? Why can't I get him on the phone? Why isn't he responding to this or that other thing? And I actually know that she got a lot of support at the time. Mary King was running MPRI. And she got a lot of support from Penny Ryder at AFSC. She attended some PCAP events and said she found some community there. And so I think that that sense of connection is very important because even though she's got friends, she's got family and that kind of stuff, there's so much shame and so much stigma associated with that kind of thing that she needed to be able to find people with common experiences to be able to relate. You know, another thing, quick couple things that I wanted to share. One was a person sharing about her experience with the carceral state just mourning that she is an African American woman. She was lucky to be able to get married, but she's found that her two, she shares this story often, her two younger sisters mourn because so many of the men in the demographic that they're looking to be able to marry, so many of the men are gone and locked away. I talked to another guy earlier today. He's been out for just over a year, and we've been pretty close. But one of the things that he said is that he's just been overwhelmed by this sense of wanting to connect with his family and just realizing that even though he desperately wants to connect with them, those relationships are unhealthy. I can keep going on this, but I'll pass it on. No? Good. Thank you.
What's the question?
How have you maintained or lost relationships because of the prison system?
Actually, my story is two-tiered. I talked about the kids that I adopted, my brother's children, because he was in and out of prison all the time. But I haven't said much about him. And he's mentally ill. He was a substance abuser. Every year I used to go to Detroit and take him shopping and get shoes and clothes and stuff because he didn't know how to do those things. So it was like I was taking care of the children and him. Finally, unfortunately, he hit his head, he fell out of bed, and he passed away. And the children were very, very upset. They knew what funerals were. And when I made the arrangements to have him buried, they said, "Mom, we don't want him to be cremated. We want him to be there in the casket so we can see him and put flowers in." And that just, oh man, that just broke my heart. Because I had tried so long to make sure they could stay together, even though he was crazy, he was a substance abuser, they still loved their father. And I think that's really important for people to remember about children who have relatives that are incarcerated or mentally ill or whatever the situation may be. Children love their parents. And when I tried to sort of remove them from him, they wouldn't buy it. They were like stuck, like glue. This is my dad. We don't care if he's crazy, if he's a substance abuser, even if he's a killer, we don't care. This is our father. And from that experience, it taught me that people who were having adverse things happen in their life, good things could come out of adversity. And I decided that I had done the right thing by taking them and giving their father a funeral instead of having him cremated. Question? No?
We'll do questions in a bit. We're going to let Heather.
Okay.
I might take a little bit of creative liberty on this question about how through Youth Arts Alliance programming, we're trying to disorient the system towards families and connection. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is, for example, this summer in Jackson County, we did an abstract resin art workshop with the young people in treatment there. And they participated in the workshop, learned the, sort of practice, the technique, their own style. We invited local legislators, local community stakeholders into the facility to learn the practice from the young people who had just learned and experienced it. Then we asked the local Crouch Senior Center if they would be open to the young people leading a class in abstract resin art for the local seniors who attend the senior center. And this was after they had also shared the practice with their families and they were able to take a piece home. So their siblings and their parents came. And what it was a collaborative mural project that allowed each person who attended each one of these events to take a piece of their abstract resin art and then also contribute a piece to a collaborative mural. And the result was 85 beautiful abstract resin art pieces that culminate in a community mural. And I think one thing that's very disorienting for a system that sort of operates a certain way is to learn something from the child that they may have had some responsibility in placing in these spaces. And also that the seniors were completely uplifted and eager to learn the practice, and that the young people took on an entirely new posture in that space. I mean, in their bodies, like the way that they were standing, the way that they were talking. And coming from a space that manages bodies to operate a certain way, right, to walk a certain way, you ask questions a certain way, you speak at a certain volume in those spaces. And then to watch them share with some folks who were less hearing able and had to have certain accommodations for where their bodies could be because of wheelchairs or assistive devices, to hear those young people shout instruction and encouragement was really something. And in a similar vein, last summer we did pinhole photography workshops, actually, with Isaac Wingfield, who's here. And we converted youth cells into dark rooms in the facility. And in doing that, we invited facility administrators, judges, probation officers, other folks to learn photography practice from the kids who had learned in a photo residency. And they did this with a lot of pride, and it's not an easy process. And one thing that I fight against is this idea of arts as hobby or interest, but arts are radical, electric, frustrating, sources in our lives too. They're also like a lot of problem and trial and error, and so after youth had created images over the course of the workshop and having a lot of failures around exposure. And it also is this sort of opportunity to get outside in spaces where you don't get outside a lot. So they built in a facility that does not allow cameras, and this is where I kind of get excited. In a facility that doesn't allow cameras, youth built them with their own hands, made the cameras themselves, captured their own images inside a facility, and then taught others to do that. And there was this particular circumstance in one of the facilities where the administrator was invited to join the process. And it took about 6 minutes and 24 seconds to completely process this photograph. And there are 2 young people in the room who had really taken to the whole practice. And so the administrator came in. There was a staff there because a staff is required to be present. And so it was 2 kids, a staff, and an administrator in the room. And she started to say, I'm feeling kind of uncomfortable in here. It's just, it's just a really small space. And the kids sort of look at one another and, can I get out? Do you mind, can I leave? And they gently, one of the young people gently says, no, you can't go, because if we open the door, our artwork will be ruined. The process, you will have interrupted the process. And she said, well, how much longer? And a young person who is kind of soft-spoken is, this is where we are every day that we're here in this room, this small room that isn't tolerable for 6 minutes. And I think part of reform and change and the potential for art practice in these spaces is also to disorient the system towards these deeply rich ties to family, ties to community. And even in that moment, I think it's so profound, like this idea of process, right? Like you'll interrupt the process to open the door. And what does that say largely? What process are we undertaking as a community, as a society, when we decide that closing a door and locking it is that answer? And also, what does it mean if soft-spoken voices are reassuring the powers that be? I think that there's capacity for greatness, even in that circumstance.
Okay. This question is kind of strange to me because I think prisons are the opposite of community. I think prisons their purpose is to destroy community. It's to push someone out and give them a timeout or whatever. And so by creating community, you're kind of destroying the prison. And maybe that's the point. But the way I thought about this, I was thinking about how prisons do destroy community. Besides building the prisons far away and putting big walls around them, making it expensive to have phone calls and difficult to write, prisoners are not allowed to write their other people in other prisons. It's very difficult to make friendships in the men's prison, probably somewhat in the women's too because of the different levels. But you're together for a while and people get transferred all the time and you don't really know when that's going to happen, and then you're not allowed to communicate anymore. When you get out of prison, so my son was there for 11 years, anybody that's been there a long time has a lot of friendships in the prison. They finally developed a new community. Then you go out, when you're on parole, you are not allowed to write or call or communicate directly with anyone that's still in prison, or supposedly anyone on the outside who has a felony background. So the mentors that could help you, you're not supposed to communicate with unless you get permission of your parole officer. This seems like a very counterproductive rule. And so one solution is to get more volunteers into the prison. They don't make it easy for volunteers to get in the prison. And they have a lot of rules that if you volunteer with one prison, then you can't volunteer in another prison. Or if you volunteer in the prison, you can't have if you're going in as a group, then you can't write or talk to individual people that are in the prison. Or if anybody gets out, then you're supposed to no longer associate with them when they're out because you knew them when they were in. I mean, the whole thing is set up to destroy community and communication. What else? Okay, so the community that's on the outside is also hurt by the fact that all these people are pulled out of the community and put into prison, especially the poor communities, the communities of color. Like was said, there's not enough marriageable men, there's not enough fathers, there's not enough breadwinners, there's not enough people paying taxes. Instead, we're paying a lot of money to keep these people incarcerated. We're hurting ourselves. And then people come out and then they get shunned by society. So they don't let them reintegrate. They can't build community then. They're tainted then. They're the other. And everybody's afraid of them. It's just so messed up. I guess that's about all.
So I'm just real quickly going to do a personal story of how this has impacted me personally. And then talk a little bit more about community and neighborhood. But Kathy talked about how volunteers can't communicate with people if they're volunteering in any prison. And I walk a really weird fine line because I do advocacy work. But through these 16 years, like I said earlier, some of my best friends are people in prison. And the state wants to control everything. They monitor J-Pay, they monitor phone calls, they monitor the mail, they read the mail. And so some of my friendships through the years that I've made are really deep and profound friendships. But technically, I shouldn't really be communicating with people because I don't want to jeopardize my work that I do. But morally, I have to communicate with people, and I'm connected to people, and I'm not going to throw friendships away because the state wants me to. So I think we have to bump up against it all the time. And there have been fine lines that have been crossed by multiple organizations where people have been banned from the prison. I think that if you get banned from a prison, it's totally messed up, but you've been doing probably some sort of labor of love in it. You could be, because the state controls so much of movement and people being who's supposed to be inside and who's supposed to communicate with whom and all that kind of stuff. So I had a J-Pay account, which I hate J-Pay, but I would personally communicate with a few people who I was pretty close with. And this one time I got really paranoid, and I called Pete up, and I was like, Pete, I'm super paranoid. I feel like they're watching us. If you're listening to this, state of Michigan, you were probably watching us. And there was nothing nefarious, nothing wrong, no romantic relationships, no exchange of money, not breaking any policy directives at all, just having friendship with people, talking about our children, our relationships, talking about violence in the community and what we could do to deter it. I mean, like, good stuff. And he's like, I think they're watching us too. And I deactivated my JPay account. I went home and got rid of it. And one of my dear friends, who I'm still very good friends with, she was so mad at me for like 3 years because I was one of her lifelines. She sees me as family. And I was a super important person in her life. And then the state like put this wedge between us. We can still write, right? She calls me. I'm her only conduit to her son who's in jail right now. I'm the only person that calls up the public defender and gets information and gets her information about her son because the victim is a family member who can't communicate with him. So I'm not gonna let that go because it would be immoral for me to do that, right? It would be wrong for me to not take her phone calls and give her information about her son because she can't get it from anybody else. That's how messed up the carceral state is. And I just wanna hit on community for one moment. I think that Aaron started talking about McKinley being a really problematic landlord. It's all over Washtenaw County. It's not just McKinley. It's every big landlord in this county refuses to rent for the most part to people with felony convictions. The one that will, you know, their properties are a little bit, yeah, a little bit. And this, I think, is these landlords are complicit in instilling fear in us as neighborhoods, that we're supposed to otherize people that have these stigmas and that we're supposed to think that they're gonna come back and harm us. And that's just not the case. It's totally irrational, and we're allowing it to happen. So I have this thing, because I don't wanna just bitch about the system. I think that, I don't know if it's possible, but I really want to explore this in the city of Ypsilanti, that any other big landlords, like that they have to, if they're going to buy new properties, have to be willing, like if we can pass a city ordinance, to at least rent to like 10 to 15% of people with felony convictions, that they have to agree to do that before they're going to get occupancy permits for their rental properties in the city of Ypsilanti, because it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I don't care how big they are. I have gone through this with 3 people recently who got out of prison, and because of friendships, they're at our office, and we're trying to help them navigate. And they have been denied again and again and asked to pay $100 or $50 fees, application fees, when they know that they're gonna get denied. So I think we should push for some sort of, I don't know if it would be legal, but I think it might be. I actually think they have to get occupancy permits. So if the city was like, no, we're not gonna give them to you unless you agree to rent some of your properties to people with felony convictions, then, you know, but that's neither here nor there. It's just in my head right now.
That's
So.
activism.
And we need that kind of activism at the University of Michigan as well. I had a student who was found to have a felony conviction that he had not disclosed at the time of his application to the university, and he, after that was discovered, was never allowed to live in campus housing again. I've not heard that it's a policy. I've not seen that it's always applied in the same way to everybody. But the truth of the matter is that once the university discovered that my student had a felony record, he was never again granted student housing for the rest of his time at the university. So we're doing it all over. I am so moved by everything that the panel has said. I have one more question that I'd like to ask you to answer very briefly, if you could, even though it's a big and tough question, so that we can hear from the audience. I want to know what can we do? Natalie's already just given us one suggestion about what we can do to address some of the issues that we've been talking about tonight, but what can we, each of us here tonight and those of us listening on the internet, do to build and strengthen relationships between people who are inside the walls or criminal justice affected and those of us who are not? What has the work of community building in the context of the carceral state done for you personally? So, Aaron, do you want to start?
I'm ready. Am I close enough this? Yeah, I mean, it's a great follow-up, and absolutely, you know, I'll be honest, I'm a Natalie fan. I don't know if she knows it or not, but I get really excited when I hear talk like that, and I want to do whatever I can to support it. And see, one of the great things about this is that I think we've heard of like pyramid schemes and like Ponzi schemes and all that kind of stuff. This doesn't have to be, right? This can be this kind of situation where if everybody here goes out and talks to, like, makes it a point to bring 2 or 3 friends to the next event. You know, if we make the commitment to get involved and stay involved, because this isn't just like a one-time, this isn't this isn't just something that is like an election cycle kind of issue. This one's not going to go away unless we make it go away, right? The idea of not in my backyard, you know, it has to be abolished. The more that we can bring to light and normalize not just the negative headlines that we see, but make headlines out of the successes. We've started to see some of these stories, and I'm really inspired by it, you know. So that's it, you know. It's getting out to events. It's bringing your friends to events. It's talking about it with families. It's going back to the organizations that you work for, the businesses that you work for. I don't know if there's any landlords here, but we could talk, you know. But it's encouraging people, you know, to take a look at the policies that we have in place and to say, you know, is this creating a hindrance? Are we keeping people out that we don't even intend to or don't even mean to? It's having conversations. It's reaching back into prisons. It's staying connected with people. You know, people have mentioned JPay a couple times. For people who aren't familiar with it, JPay is it's an app that's on my phone, and it's terrible. It's very buggy, and when it does work, it charges me 50 cents to send an email to somebody. 50 cents per email. If I want to add like a picture or anything like that, that's an extra 50 cents. If I want to add an extra stamp so that somebody can write me back, and I wrote an email, attached a picture, and I want them to write me back, that's $1.50. For one correspondence. And so that's it, you know. I do the work of a brighter way to do direct service to people, but I don't think that that's enough. I can instill hope, I can foster that hope, but if people don't have opportunity, realistic opportunity, you know, I think it's critical to advocate for policy and to be able to expand those opportunities. So I do that through a brighter way. I do that through Nation Outside. And I think that it's just critical work to just keep it going. You know, one of the other things that we know is that civic engagement. You know, so many people. I heard the term othering. You know, we need to break that down. We need to know that you know, it's not about. Actually, I think this was a Joe Summers quote, and I'm going to get this wrong, but he said something about, you know, the traditional languages. We talk about paying a debt to society and getting this debt paid, but we need to do more to recognize the dignity and value that people add to our community.
Hello again. I think that one of the things I wanted my story to illustrate is the role of grandmothers in the carceral state. When women are locked up, typically the mother takes the children. Her mother takes the children. And we have a lot of situations right now where grandmothers who barely have enough food to eat, no bus fare, no one to shovel their walkway, and they're taking care of 3 or 4 children. And the state is just, well, it's okay, as long as nobody complains. I was in that situation in the beginning, but I refused to be a victim. I read somewhere the amount of money the state saves by having a relative take care of the kids that could have gone to foster care. It's scandalous. If you read the Peter Wagner demographics, you can find this kind of information. It's sickening to know that especially women of color are barely able to feed themselves and their children because their children are in prison and there's nobody else to take care of their children. And as long as the children aren't being abused, they can stay with any relative. I think the situation that I was in for a lot of years, I was fortunate because at some point I did receive funding, but there are a lot of grandmothers now who take care of their grandchildren, and none of them have enough food to eat. I think that is absolutely scandalous. Not because I'm a grandmother, because if I was 20, I would still think it's scandalous. This country is going to the dogs, and I'm sick and tired of the carceral state and all the things that it touches that destroy our lives. Thank you. I wish I could put my finger.
So what can we do, you do, what can we all do to help folks inside? I think recognize that there's not a single policy or procedure or bureaucratic practice that exists that wasn't created by a person. You know, that relationships and collective action, that paying attention and knowing what's happening and organizing around that, like Natalie suggested with housing, the same, you know, challenges face young people who are in transitional housing, transitioning out of foster care, who need a place to stay, who no longer have social support. It's like, so, but, okay, maybe this is unpopular. But what I don't think you should do is create your own nonprofit. Please just don't. Because, and I say that, and it is funny, kind of. I say that because before you take your idea and galvanize it and gain a board and move forward and figure out a budget and do all of this stuff, I have no doubt that there are brilliant ideas in this room, but please don't form a nonprofit just yet. Investigate and explore what emboldens you to move for the community, and then find someone who cobbled together a wheel and is clutching at resources to keep that wheel rolling, and lend yourself to that effort. And then build it, make it stronger, make it intersectional, interdisciplinary, bring so many people from so many different practices, so many different disciplines, academics, organizationals, social services, mindfulness, clinicians. Bring everyone to the table so that the fabric of expertise, knowledge, and passion is so woven that it would take something so insidious and sharp to cut through it. So just don't do that. Okay, well, do that, but don't form a nonprofit. Trust me. They're a lot of work. Yeah.
I have a couple ideas. I think on the back table there's two suggestions. One is restorative justice. So we want to keep people out of prison if possible, and the best form of restorative justice, I think, is an alternative to incarceration. Restorative justice, instead of talking about who broke what law and what do they deserve, it looks at what harm was caused, that a person caused someone else, or that a person caused the community, or what relationships were hurt, and then decides how to heal the harm. So they get the person who caused the harm, the people who were harmed, to get together with a facilitator and discuss how it can be healed and how the relationships can be improved. And do that, might involve paying back money, might involve repairing something, it might have, but whatever the victim feels that they need, as an alternative to prison, and we'd have much better society too. So there's a group in Ann Arbor, Friends of Restorative Justice, and their brochure about restorative justice is on the back table, and they meet monthly, and they're trying to get restorative justice practices in the criminal justice system in Washington County, and currently they're being allowed to do it in the juvenile drug court, but they haven't done the first case yet. They've just been allowed, and they've gotten trained, and they're setting it up. We hope to spread to the adult court too. The second idea that I have back there is a law, and I'd like you all to write your state legislatures asking them to sponsor this law. And it's a law to prohibit discrimination against people once they have, ex-offenders, once they've served their time. So there is a bill in the Connecticut legislature right now. It hasn't been approved yet. It was just introduced, but lists prohibit discrimination in housing, in public education, in employment, in banking, in loans and insurance, and maybe a couple other things. It's just 2 sentences. It'd be easy to do that. So write your representative, ask them if they'd be willing to sponsor something like that. If they express an interest, let Ashley know. So the copy of the law is in back now. And other countries, I know Germany has such a law. And the last thing is probably not as important, because this is much harder to make happen, and I'm not sure if it's as useful, but I think that prisons should be local, that it shouldn't be statewide, it shouldn't be federal. There should be just one system too. It's very hard to reform things when you've got all these different kinds of prisons and you have to work in all the laws in all the different places. But the prison or the incarceration place should be regional, and it should be central to the community, should be not open, but transparent, with volunteers going in all the time, just like the public school is. That it's part of the community, and people are working on improving the people that are in there and getting them out.
So I really think that if you're not already connected to people in prison, you should be connected to people in prison. That's the place to start, to transform our own ways of thinking about people in prison, and to really take to the community that we know people and love people inside. So we have a project at AFSC called the Good Neighbor Project. I brought folders with a lot of information. Demetrius, my colleague, really went to town on these folders. So if you're interested in the project, you're more than welcome to take a folder. They're over there. And we have trainings twice a month, sometimes just once a month, but twice a month at our office, and we can connect you to somebody doing a long prison sentence. So somebody serving a life sentence or a long indeterminate sentence, which usually means they're in prison on a violent offense. And so what I really want to see is that we don't rely on prisons for anything in the future, the far off future. And that means that we have to grapple with violence in our communities. And we really have to have conversations about what it means to be safe and whose safety are we really concerned about. And so this brings me to this other piece. For white folks in the room, we have to be doing work on white supremacy. And we have to do it really deep, and we have to do it well, because if we're ever going to topple the carceral state, then white folks have to own our role in creating it again and again and again and again. So that's other work that we can do. There are some legislative things that are happening right now, but I think that the legislature, they do things in spurts and fits, and that's why we have the mess that we have. And so I think that what I would like to, I'm going to put 2 things out there that are happening. I'm pretty sure that we're going to try to go after the felony firearm 2-year flat sentence this year. I think there are legislators who are interested in that. It does impact young black men disproportionately, and so that'll be a good thing. And if we can mobilize folks to call your legislators when that happens, that'd be great. And then we have a Bill of Rights for incarcerated parents and pregnant women that we are hoping will go through this session also, and I can give you more information on that. But I really believe that being connected to people in prison is super important, and especially people serving life and long sentences. They're the folks whose families die when they're there. There's 38,500 people in prison in Michigan right now, and 11,000, more than 11,000, but about 11,000 folks are in prison for the rest of their lives, more or less. And one person by one person, we're trying to get people out and trying to make changes, but they need to be connected to folks. And I know that for the lifers who've gotten out, they would say that having supports in the community were really, really important to them. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you all so much. I now want to open it up to you in the audience to talk about the things that are on your mind and ask questions of our beautiful panel. And the lovely Nora Kronitsky will be running around the audience with a microphone.
Should we take 2 at a time, Ashley?
Sure, let's take 2 at a time. Josh has one. And anybody else want to ask a question after Josh, and then we'll let the panel answer those two questions together.
Thank you for all that. Aaron couldn't get it too, but now I can. So I don't know if this is a question as much as I want to emphasize something that Aaron and that Natalie said. I don't know how many people are aware of the real problem with JPay. Is not just the emails, it's so much more. There's only really 2 companies in the United States that have almost monopolized this market. One of them is JPay, which is owned by a company called Securus. They don't just, it's not just, they own everything from, they monetize everything from phone calls to emails to the ability to put money on people's accounts, which they charge $5 at least every time you put money in someone's account. They're now doing something that's really terribly scary, which is voice printing people. So that if you're in prison and you're doing a phone call with someone on the outside, they will voice print you and anyone you talk to on the outside, and then they'll use that for investigative services. I mean, this is a very terrifying set of things, not just for people inside prison, but for people on the outside of prison. You're being surveilled anytime you have these relationships Natalie's talking about. And here's the reason I bring this up, because Securus, the parent company for JPay, is owned by our very own owner of the Detroit Pistons. And so we have the ability in this state to bring pressure on Securus and JPay, but we're not doing it. And if any league in the world should be opposed to this, it should be the darn NBA. And I just think this is a real opportunity for our community in this state to start saying, that's not okay. You know, we support your team, that's not okay. So that's something I think right off the bat you can do. So that's not a question, but I just wanted to add on to what they were saying.
Thank you. And Securus is nationwide oppressing people, not just here in the state of Michigan.
I just want to speak on behalf of people with mental illness, because I think we all know that presently the carceral state is serving as the de facto place for people with mental illness. And they don't really, that's not really an appropriate place for people who have mental illness. So until we figure out how to have a system for treating people with mental illness that's both accessible and effective, I think we're going to continue to use the carceral state in an inappropriate way for people with mental illness. So we need to, I think, address the issue of how to take care of people who have mental illnesses. And we're not doing that appropriately.
Are there other questions or comments from the audience? Yes, there's one over here and one over here.
Hi, this was spoken about earlier, and I was just wondering if I just wanted to hear more about how families are often, like, a lot of their money and resources goes towards helping their loved ones in prison. I was also wondering if, I was interested in more about, like, the community around the family as well, how they might be impacted or exploited financially.
Kathy, if you're looking like you want to say something.
Well, I guess I would say that, I mentioned a couple things, that the people inside don't have hardly any money, but yet they still have expenses, and it's very nice if you can help them out. And then, like in our situation, by the time our son got in, we had a lot of legal expenses, which is a loan that maybe someday he'll pay back. I don't know if that will ever happen. But and then there was a lot of loss to the community. He had just bought his first house. He had just got he was beginning to get a good job at work, had just gotten a raise, and it was the same time when the real estate market was crashing, so his house ended up being one of the ones that was foreclosed on. I mean, it was just a loss of money everywhere. What else were you thinking of costs? I mean, there's like the JPay and the phones. The jail phones are really expensive. We've worked pretty hard and got the state phone calls down to maybe 20 cents a minute or something, maybe a little less than that now. And but I think at some of the jails it's still like $15 to make a 15-minute phone call.
I think too there are many other costs that come that are a little bit unexpected, like the costs of time and energy and where you could be spending the rest of your life. So in Texas, where I'm from and where my father spent 20 years in prison, it's a huge challenge to get to prison in a state that's that large. So we drove 8 hours each way to see my father from my mother's doorstep to get to the prison where he was. And that meant that if we went, you lost a whole weekend of doing homework, of all the things that my mother needed to do around the house. I've known other school children to appear in dirty clothes at school and get made fun of by people because nobody at their house could do laundry because they had spent the entire weekend trying to get to the person who they love. And then, of course, there are restitution costs in many states. So if you have a loved one in prison who has, as part of their sentence, some kind of a fee to pay to the state, every time you try to put money on their books, depending on what state they're in, I think California takes 50%, you have to put double the amount of money you want your loved one to have until that restitution, which might be many thousands of dollars, gets paid off, because they take half the money that you're putting on your loved one's books. So there are just these myriad expenses. Arizona might still be, I'm not sure, but at least for a while, was charging $50 per visit to the family just to show up. You pay a $50 fee to get in the door to see the person that you love. When you visit, sometimes for 6 or 8 hours at a time, you have to buy whole meals from the vending machines there for however many members of your family are present, and you're paying outrageous prices to buy really crappy food to eat with your family in this place. So the financial costs, we could go on all night.
Yeah, I mean, and we spend $2.2 billion a year on the prison system in Michigan, just alone. That's a huge chunk. It's 25% of the general budget. It's a huge chunk of change. And then in addition to that, I mean, bringing up healthcare for people in prison, it's a really not very good healthcare. And you are living in really unhealthy conditions, right? So bad food, overly processed, super high in sodium, just not very good food. And people could go on and on about it who are in this room and talk about it. But then for people who are living there a long time on cement, the cost to the community when they come home is going to be huge, or it's going to be huge when they're in prison. It's going to get bigger and bigger. I mean, they will say, the state always says there's like $1.5 million prisoner, right? Because we're spending that much on health care for probably preventative things. Not all things are preventative, but there are preventative things that could have happened. And so it's costly across the board, and it seeps out into the community.
And it's not uncommon now for every state in the union to have at least one prison that has a hospice wing in it, because we're keeping really elderly and infirm people until they die. There's another question here and then two up front.
For about 4 years, Melanie and I worked in a maternal infant health program, and we went downriver in 18 communities, and we provided services for moms and babies with Medicaid. And when we entered those homes, we discovered almost every house we went to was touched by mass incarceration in the carceral state. You know, the mother had been on parole, the dad was in jail. One place we went, a mom had just delivered her baby on the same day that her husband got life. And so we quickly saw that the school to prison pipeline actually was conception to prison pipeline. And if you were a white mother in some place like Bloomfield Hills and you were married and you had insurance and you had a substance abuse problem, no one was going to step in and take your babies. But if you were a black woman from some place like downriver, like Ecorse, River Rouge, and you tested positive for marijuana after they tested your baby's little poopy diaper after the baby was born, because you self-treated yourself with marijuana because you could no longer take your medication while you were pregnant, they would call CPS and they would go in and they would take those babies. And if you had a history of having your children taken, they would take them automatically for baby 2, 3, 4, 5. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your experience doing that, Mel, and the importance of providing support for moms and babies.
Well, I think that job was a job that I really got a lot of gratification from, because I got to interact with the people that were suffering the most in our society, and I was already interested in this group of people. what I came away with was that, like me, the grandmothers were the rock of the family. The son was in prison, the daughter was in prison, maybe the granddaughter was, I mean, there were even great-grandmothers taking care of kids downriver. And the problem is a lot of people were uneducated and they didn't know how to use the system to their benefit. So they had to depend on people like us to explain the rules and the regulations and talk about what's going to happen to you if you do illegal things and what's going to happen if you let your drug-abusing son-in-law move back in. I mean, there were a lot of problems that were regular things that regular people, well, I guess none of us are regular, but that they just had problems that were everyday that we would know how to solve. But it was because they were poor, disenfranchised, disconnected from the rest of the community. They didn't understand rules and regulations. And that's where organizations like the one that I work for came into play, because you could help people move ahead. You could help people understand why it was important for their grandchildren to go to school. You could help people understand why you can't let your drug-addicting, crazy son-in-law live here anymore. So it was a good job because you felt good doing things for people who didn't understand a lot, except they were hungry and tired, and their families were taking advantage of them.
Thank you. There's a question up here.
It was mentioned earlier that there are communities where a small town near a prison would become saturated with the culture of the prison. And the people there would become so dependent for employment on the prison that if there would be a big political hassle about the prospect of closing the prison because it might become a ghost town. And I'm concerned about for-profit prisons, which work into the formula that Natalie was talking about here in terms of the cost of prisons to society and how that cost is borne. And I wonder whether the people on the panel have had experiences with for-profit prisons as opposed to publicly supported prisons in terms of the relationship that the prisoner has to the institution.
So that's a great question. So since we don't have private prisons here, it'd be an interesting question to think about juvenile detention because it is privatized more in this state than our adult system is. I mean, it's 5% of the U.S. adult prison system is actually privately owned. And my colleagues in Arizona have worked very much against privatization for years. And the same sorts of problems that occur in publicly run prisons occur in the private prisons. And but when people are being paid even less than they're being paid in a publicly run prison, then their investment in their job is the same, right? And so they don't care as much, and there's a lot of turnover. And so what I have heard from my colleagues is that violence in private facilities is sometimes at a higher level than violence in publicly run facilities because people are angry all around. I mean, they're angry in prisons in general, in public prisons, but there's more violence that might percolate when you have staff who are also being abused through low wages. I do think, though, that the whole permeation of prison culture, whether it's private or public, into the community, we have to also think about cyclical trauma and the violence of prison, right? And so what is happening to those staff that work in those prisons, they carry that out into the community. They carry substance use disorders out into the community to take care of like what their pain and suffering is from the trauma that they're experiencing from caging other people. And so it's a really important thing for us to keep on our radars. When we talk about closing prisons, it's not just because we want to like steal jobs from folks and get folks out of, I mean, we want to close prisons, but we also want the health of the whole community, and that's the people that work there. I always talk about the health of staff. and how unhealthy it is for people to be the key holders of cages, and the trauma that creates in their lives. And so I think prisons are violent. I think private prisons could potentially be more violent. Some actually, and I'm going to throw this out there, are newer institutions with better lines of sight, less shit can happen. And so that has not been studied. I'm not putting that in, I don't want to put that into the mix because I'm very anti-private prison. But when you have newer facilities that are cleaner, more bigger spaces, well lit, they can also be safer places. Whereas some prisons in Michigan are very old structures with no lines of sight, corners everywhere. People can do nefarious stuff in those corners. And so this is a very long conversation, but nobody's really looked at the advantages of private prisons, and we shouldn't. But I do think that some of the newer structures matter in this conversation.
Yeah. I think we can take one more, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
So I've been to a couple of the Carceral State Symposium presentations, and so I have a question that reflects back on earlier presentations I've seen, but it's for all of the panelists. So one of the things I've noticed in the presentations I've been to is that the framing of the Carceral State project is a little more generalized. And then the panelists in both of the panels I've been to start to bring in issues of systemic racism, the settler colonial genocide in the United States, these larger issues, historical issues, and institutional issues. So my question would be, if you're reflecting on the sort of intellectual framing of UMichigan's project, are there some things you think they need to address or you think might be left out? Because as soon as it came to the panel in both cases, people start to address questions of racism, anti-blackness, how people of color are disproportionately affected. In both of the presentations from the Carceral State Project, race was not mentioned, right? Carceral State and then the impact on our generalized communities is how it's framed. So I'm interested actually in how you might talk back to the project. The second question I have is, it's framed as a potentially mutually beneficial project, right? Where an institution like University of Michigan can amass its resources and do this intellectual work with community members where we can both benefit. But I'd like to be a little bit provocative and ask you if you think it should be mutually beneficial, given that we're discussing institutions that are so enormously extractive to the point of almost genocide in the cases of communities that have been totally decimated by the carceral state. Do you think it should be mutually beneficial, or do you think that there's a chance, again, to provoke the institution where we try to extract from the wealth and knowledge of the institution, and that there is a return to communities, as opposed to a sharing in some way? So those are my two questions. That's a lot, I'm sorry.
Natalie?
You want to go?
No, you go.
It's a great question. Sorry, I did this. So the whole question of racism, and I think that let's just start with Washtenaw County, right? I think that we, as a community, if we considered Washtenaw County a community, we have a shit ton of work to do. And so I think we have to start with that framing. We have to talk about racism. We have to talk about the disproportionate impact on communities of color. We have to talk about the fact that their 48197 and 48198 are overly policed. And why is that? And why is it okay to have cameras in the Willow Run? And there's a lot of people who I appreciate who think it's okay. Black folk too, not just white folks. But we have to shift the conversation around the otherizing that we've done. And we've created this is the legacy, right? We've created this sort of, that young black men are predators in our communities. They start getting targeted in Ypsi public schools. And not just young black men, young black girls too. You can get suspended from elementary school for fighting in Ypsi in a third grade classroom. I was like a parent involved in trying to mediate a conference with a black man who asked me to be his ally in it because he was scared he was gonna lose his mind because his daughter got suspended in the third grade. These are things that we have to confront, right? We have to, And I don't have easy answers for it. I'm doing it in my own life. I try to do it every day in my own work and life. We also in Michigan have to think about who's at leadership tables from organizations. I walk into rooms in policy thinky groups and they're all effing white, and I'm sick and tired of it. And I call it out. I've started to really call it out, and and to really put money in, and this is where the university could come into this, into leadership development with impacted communities and doing anti-racism work, right, for real, like putting the money where it's at. I think the U of M has been incredibly extractive from AFSC over the years, and I'm starting to like draw a line in the sand where I'm not going to give free labor anymore. I want to be in partnership, but like I get paid shit. I've been doing this work a long time and I love it with all of my heart, but I have a family to support. And so I want our organization to benefit, and there are some great examples. I talked to Engaged Pedagogy class, and there are great examples of where we've done really good mutually supportive work. But those models have to be lifted up if this carceral project's gonna work. So that's, you know, I have dreamed for a really long time that, and I live in the township, one street into the township now in Ypsi. I lived in Ypsi City since '94 before that. I've wished for like a truth and reconciliation process to happen in the city, like in Ypsi City, around racism for years. Like it would be a public process. I don't think Ypsi has that leadership right now. Maybe I'm wrong. I have no idea. But like I would love to see something like that happen, and to really talk about the fact that they don't allow people to easily integrate back into the community who went to prison is a good starting point to have the conversation about racism in Ypsi, and what happens in our schools, which is totally effed up. Yes.
Well, I think you're kind of fierce out there asking these questions, and I'm grateful. When I first found out about the carceral state, I wondered about, oh boy, you're right, but I'm on the panel, so it's just like, ugh. What did you just do?
Just go ahead and do it.
Okay.
We'll cover your microphone.
So, in my relationship to U of M, like personally, I'll speak to that first. I attended here for graduate school, and I sat in the School of Social Work office and had to advocate for my case to be a non-traditional student. That I had to work full-time while founding YAA and get a graduate degree to gain the skills to further it, right? Which probably put me here today. But the fact that I had to sit down in an office and argue my way into a program was sort of my first, like, I don't know, maize and blue, maybe maize and blah, you know? Oh. And I think even saying that, okay, so the carceral state is brilliant in its effort to have interdisciplinary, collective think tank around solving problems, okay? And I want more of that. And some of the best work that Youth Arts Alliance has done in partnership with the university has been through the Prison Creative Arts Project, specifically Sarah Messer's creative writing class, right? Okay, and so, and the School of Public Health assisting us in developing social determinants of health evaluation for the work that we're doing so that we can further ourselves and propagate some of what we're doing now, right? And that's beneficial, and that feels good. I've also had really deeply, deeply problematic partnerships with socially engaged learning programs that aren't structured have robust training or any expectations other than to plant a U of M student in the room is considered value, right? That's problematic to me. So when I first heard about the carceral state, I've had feelings of skepticism as a community organization, like pretty deep feelings of skepticism. Mostly because I thought that maybe the biggest work that could happen on U of M's campus is to allow people with criminal records to attend here. So it seems deeply, I'm challenged even to sit here. Because to be honest, I had criticisms. Ashley and I talked. You know, we had, there are these people I admire, the people who are driving this forward are the top of their field, you know, are really brilliant minds. But damn if it doesn't feel a little ugly that a center of research and evaluation, of program modeling, of best practices, of driving force into the world, supporting really a professional field, right, in this work, right, which we could call into question how we, even sitting here, further our own, right? Like, I hope I don't have a job someday. But first, wouldn't it be really something to make U of M Ann Arbor, which you go to any prison, you go to any youth facility, you go to any place in this state, and there's this eagerness, like this prize, like this trophy, like on the top of a hill, you know, like I'm gonna go to U of M. Like, may that be accessible to everyone. May that truly be accessible. May people with records come into this place and may they inform this center. May they drive it forward. May they present the most proximate solutions and strategies of lived experience, which in my mind, if research and lived experience and multidisciplinary perspectives don't come to the table together, then we're kind of building, you know, silos and vacuums that we've been operating in. Those are the same things that keep the prison, you know, industrial complex moving forward. We're in, you know, familiar space, hearing the same stories and telling us ourselves the same stories about what we're doing, right? So that being said, what I mentioned earlier about the nonprofit thing is kind of part of what you're talking about in terms of extracting resource, in terms of resource, right? It's like, we also have nonprofit industrial complex. We're also all doing this work in the similar vein that sort of sometimes puts us in a place of feeling competitive for resource. And that shit's capitalism. And that's a whole nother conversation. You know what I mean? So, okay, just thank you. You know, so now what? Now I'll never be on another carceral state panel?
Probably not.
Probably not. Oh my gosh, don't bite the hand that fed you.
Well, the truth is, none of us will be on a carceral state panel again because we don't repeat panelists.
Okay.
So
okay.
you're safe.
It's a new rule, right?
Yeah, I know. I think she just made it up.
It's been in existence. But I want to say, honestly and deeply from the bottom of my heart, that I am so humbled and grateful by the work of all of the panelists who come here tonight, by their honesty and sharing, by the honesty and bravery of those of you in the audience. We have a lot of work to do collectively, and we want to figure out how to do that together in the best ways that we possibly can. So we're happy to be challenged, we're happy to be engaged, and we're going to do the very best that we can figure out how to do with all the resources that we can manage to pull together, and especially in the service of those inside the walls. So thank you so much for coming tonight. We'll have one last panel for this symposium in April, and we hope you'll join us then. Thank you.